Hello and welcome to another episode of Rational Actors on Blogging Heads. I'm Kevin Glass, managing editor at Town Hall, and today I'm joined by...
I'm Joel Gehrke with National Review.
Yeah, thanks for being with me here, Joel. I wanted to talk, now that we've got the elections out of the way, about what our legislative calendar is looking like. And, you know, a lot of conservatives, which is, you know, the target audience of the website that I work at, are very worried that in this lame duck session, the impetus for Democrats in Congress, while they still have a Senate majority, and President Obama will align with some of the so-called moderate Republicans in Washington, and they'll pass a bunch of pieces of legislation that conservatives will absolutely abhor. And I wanted to have your perspective, just starting out here, because you're on the Hill every day, you're reporting this stuff, you got the pulse of the legislators right under your thumb. So what are we looking at right now with regard to legislation that is going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks?
Well, there are a few different things, some kind of small ball. The big one is really the continuing resolution, whether that will be a long-term funding bill, as some Republicans, such as House Majority Leader McCarthy and Appropriations Chairman Hal Rogers want. If that's a long-term funding bill that would fund government through the next of the year, that'll really make a lot of conservatives unhappy because they feel like their hands are tied. Then they don't have any ability to fight President Obama if he wants to implement executive amnesty. There's some smaller things. You know, on Friday, a conservative Senate staffer told me that the Energy and Commerce Committee Democrats were going to do a markup on like 22 kind of small ball bills that they hadn't even given the Republicans a chance to look at as of the day before. So probably some stuff that they want to shoehorn into an omnibus if they can get that omnibus passed, that year-long funding bill passed. But the real battle is whether that will happen or not.
Right, yeah. Conservatives, I mean, for a long time, I know, have been complaining about pretty much the existence of omnibus bills because a lot of it kind of enshrines spending and tax policies that they're upset with in the first place, and for a long period of time. And an omnibus bill, obviously, like you said, contains the potential to sneak in all sorts of other goodies or handouts or whatever you want to call them. And like you said, once you get an omnibus bill, if there's one provision you don't like, the larger and larger that it is, the harder it is for a member to vote against it. Especially, you know, a giant government funding bill like this. I know that a lot of the harder line conservatives have been against, well, they've been arguing mostly about the length of what a continuing resolution is going to look like. Because the shorter the length, obviously, they can just push it into next year, and then once the Republicans have control in the Senate and the House, they can use a little more leverage to try and extract concessions from President Obama. But the longer the bill, the longer they have to wait to get what they might want and even have any leverage at all. So what are the kind of timelines that we're looking at with these proposed continuing resolutions?
Well, we should make a distinction between the omnibus and the continuing resolution a bit.
Okay.
First of all, the continuing resolution will be kind of an extension of how the funding is working so far. The omnibus would be appropriations bills that have been written by Congress. You know, in some cases, obviously Democrats have been writing approps bills on the Senate side, and the House has been writing them on the House side. And that's the appeal of it for these appropriators of the omnibus over the CR. They want to pass some of these bills that they've been working to craft for the last, year or more. So what they want to do is some kind of a year-long funding deal, whether it's a CR or an omnibus. But what the smart money among the conservatives who really want to fight immigration, where they tend to want to go, is some sort of short-term continuing resolution that would get them into next year, say March or so, right? And then you come in, so the government's not going to run out of money anytime soon. And then you come in January and February, and you start picking up these House-passed appropriations bills. There are 7 that have passed the full House. There are maybe 10 or 11, I think, that have passed out of the House Appropriations Committee. So the idea is then you show up and you send Obama the Veterans Affairs Department funding and dare him to veto that. And then you send him the Defense Department funding and dare him to veto that. And gradually, as you pass these House-passed approach bills via regular order, you start to you're taking shutdown politics off the table, so that when you do ultimately, as a Republican, decide to withhold funding from the president for whatever agency is implementing amnesty, then it's not a government shutdown with all the different theater that goes into making sure Republicans take a black eye.
Right. So, I mean, like you said, they basically dare him to veto these appropriations bills. Is there a chance that he would do any of that? And I don't know. Obviously this is a lot of optics politics, but would that put Republicans on sounder footing when it comes to, like you said, quote unquote government shutdown if the government runs out of money?
Well, I think it just becomes an intensely difficult argument for the president to make. If the government shuts down in December because they won't provide funding for something, and he vetoed Veterans Affairs funding 2 months ago in order to preserve leverage for a fight that hadn't started yet, I think that's a very difficult argument for him to make. A lot of people who talk about this issue talk as if they think that would just be bananas for him to try that. In fact, what they're even talking about is, because bear in mind, as we alluded to earlier, House appropriators want to pass these bills and they want to get them signed into law. What they're even talking about is what one member called a cromnibus, which is just a great word. It's some kind of continuing resolution combined with some omnibus spending bills, because all omnibus really means is just a package of appropriation bills of various sizes. So the idea is maybe we can get the House appropriators on our side. This is the thinking among conservative backbenchers. Maybe we can get the House approps people on our side by saying, let's pass a continuing resolution along with, say, 5 or 6 or 7 of these bills that you've already passed. It's not everything, but it's not nothing. And it makes clear that we're not going to do a shutdown. But the one thing we definitely won't pass is a big funding package for the Department of Homeland Security that gives Obama a blank check to implement his executive orders.
So that's kind of the line that they're trying to straddle here.
They're trying, as one guy said, like, he's 100% supportive of doing something that gets us away from this stupid game of the all or nothing vote on continuing resolution to fund all of government or none of it. All he really wants is to be able to put DHS in the crosshairs and target those agencies in that department that would be implementing the, issuing the green cards and the work permits and whatever else that goes into implementing Obama's executive orders.
So is this kind of what, once the midterm elections were over, Mitch McConnell comes out and he says, what we have to do is prove to the American people that we're capable of governing and proving that Washington works and all of this language, which I saw caught a lot of flack from conservatives who thought that was kind of a code for we're going to compromise, we're going to sell out the conservatives who elected us by compromising with a president that they disagree with and, giving up our leverage from day one. But what you're outlining to me sounds a lot more strategic than I think what Mitch McConnell was being attacked for. And is that is the process, like you said, of getting away from the all or nothing budgeting process and into smaller appropriations bills, is that more what Republicans on the Hill are trying to go for here?
Well, the irony is that strategy hasn't come from McConnell or Boehner. It's coming from the backbench hardliners who are supposed to be running around with their hair on fire. They're just throwing anything they can at the wall, trying to, because what McCarthy said on the House side is he came out and said, let's do a year-long thing and clear the decks. And that's very much kind of a Hal Rogers talking point. Clear the decks and move on to our agenda. And talking to those off, what you hear from them is kind of, they don't like how they came in 2011 and they had that defund Planned Parenthood fight right off the bat. and they were sort of the aggressors, and they recall that now as sort of the first time that they had to look like they would play shutdown games and be on offense that way, which then as a precursor to the shutdown that took place last year, in 2013. So they're trying. So House leadership, I think, if House leadership had their way, they would pass a year-long bill. I think that's where sort of the momentum in that team is, and maybe even in the Senate side. But when I talk to Senate aides, obviously the immigration hawks are very clear on their position, and what you hear from other folks is that all options are on the table. We haven't discussed anything. Even Mitch McConnell did say in Politico a year or so ago, or several months ago, when he did that interview with, I believe, Manu Raju, he said that he wanted to be able to put riders on for the Environmental Protection Agency. Well, to do that, you can't have given Obama all of the money already. So, there's some understanding of the value of these kind of tactics. But I think a lot of the leaders and the appropriators really want this issue behind them.
Mm-hmm. Now, at what point the worry for conservatives is that basically if the Republicans do anything long term, it gives up their leverage, and that's when Obama gets to to issue his executive order that would legalize the status of a lot of immigrants in this country. At what point does that threat from Obama not become leverage that conservatives are worried about? I mean, at some point, if what you're saying is right, and the Republicans do want to pass, a fairly large package, even if it's not an all or nothing thing and more of these small appropriations bills, at what point does like you said, a DHS year-long funding go into effect, and a week afterwards Obama issues his executive order? Is that just going to be a threat from the White House that's going to hang over the Republican Congress for the next 2 years? Or is it something that President Obama has to come out and publicly say it's off the table or something, give up some of his leverage in order to get a longer budget bill from Republicans?
I haven't actually heard anybody discuss that kind of scenario. I think in part because the word on the street is that he's going to do it next week. Mm-hmm. This is probably why we have these reports about Harry Reid wanting the president to wait until after they get a CR, until after they get a funding deal of whatever magnitude. This is also probably why the White House is split on it. Ed Henry says that his White House are split about delay or not. But somebody leaked that document last week. A bunch of reporters got it. Fox and New York Times, saying that Obama was planning on doing it as soon as November 21st. Whether he waits, who knows? Maybe we'll see a poll in Louisiana that says Mary Lander has a shot at survival, and he'll hold off in order to avoid deep sixing her campaign. Some people have suggested they might delay the confirmation of Loretta Lynch for that reason. So I think what Republicans want is a short-term deal, so that when Obama does this, I think they expect that they'll know by the end of the year. That's what he's been saying. He'll do it by the end of the year, and if he does that, then they'll have a perfect idea of what agencies need to lose what funding.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. They won't know exactly what he's going to do until the order comes down, and at that point, like you said, if they have a short term. If they have a date at which the funding runs out and they need funding, they can actually go after what Obama's talking about. But the interesting thing, I think, to me is what Republicans have been accusing the president of, basically, since the election was over. And this is just from, I am personally a conservative, and I'm a conservative observer of politics in Washington. But it seems like that Republicans post 2014 came out saying, we're ready to govern, we want to pass legislation, all the things that, like I said, made conservatives angry. And President Obama said, none of that matters, I'm still going to do this thing that I know you guys hate and you don't want me to do. So it seems like And then Republicans, in turn, accused him of, quote unquote, poisoning the well and saying that, this would prove that Obama's not trustworthy. He's not worthwhile. He's not worth negotiating with for some of the longer term budget deals that they might be looking for. So I wonder exactly, I think this tails into how long Obama's going to hold the amnesty threat over Republicans, but I wonder if there is even an environment in which, let's say, congressional Republican leaders are comfortable going to the White House and negotiating with Obama when they think that he is going to hold this threat over them for the next 2 years.
There's a few things there. One, the problem with Republicans saying "prove we can govern" is every time that John Cornyn did this interview with Carl Hulse in the New York Times right after the primary. His first big expose after the primary season is over, after this big fight with all these Tea Party candidates. So it's now that the Tea Party's lost, we'll be able to prove we can govern. And
Joel,
so what conservatives
you?
here is is that Republicans are about to do a bunch of things, that are clearly like John Cornyn trying to get a pat on the head from the New York Times or Politico. And that's never going to be a good policy.
Hey, sorry.
What's that?
Sorry, I lost you for a second.
What conservatives hear when John Cornyn tells New York Times, now that the Tea Party's lost these primaries, we can prove we can govern, is that Republican leadership is going to go do things that are designed to elicit a pat on the head from Democrats and liberal reporters, which is never going to be a policy that conservatives want. What Obama's done is said, if you want to prove you can govern, pass my preferred immigration policy, or I'll do it via executive order. And I think we saw there was an interesting, there's always we heard about tension between the White House and Senate Democrats on the political strategy throughout whether that they should run away from Obama or not. Obama walked out the day after the election and said to the voters who cast their ballots, "I hear you," and to the more than 2/3 of Americans who did not vote, "I hear you too." And I think what he was saying right there was, this wasn't a real test. This election was not a real referendum on me. They didn't run on my stuff. And I think he was saying that he remembers that when the electorate was bigger, he won in 2012 and he won in 2008, and and in both cases they won by motivating their coalition, getting their base out, just like George Bush won in 2004. And they're going to keep doing those things that clearly work in presidential years and look ahead to 2016.
Right. Yeah. President Obama's tactics, I think, on this are really interesting. Because, he keeps exhorting Republicans to pass something, some quote unquote immigration fix, right? And he said, I've given them a year to do this and they haven't, and that's why my executive order is needed. But if they send me an immigration reform that I can sign, then that will invalidate my executive order. What seems, and I'm not sure if the optics even work on this, but let's say, and this is not going to happen, but let's say the Republican Senate comes in January and they pass, no changes, the immigration reform package that the House passed before the August recess, which was, completely and totally unacceptable to the left. At that point, they send him an immigration reform bill. He vetoes it and says, my executive order is still the law of the land. Or at that point, he issues his executive order. So I'm not sure, how his strategy works out there. He keeps saying that what he really wants is just some kind of immigration reform bill from Congress. And I wonder if that just means that he is going to get something that he doesn't like and he's going to lose on that bit of rhetoric there.
Now, I lost a bit of what you said, but I think I got enough, so I'll try. You're saying if Republicans pass an immigration bill that is not what Obama wants, will he still persist in his executive orders? I think he probably would. He doesn't have a whole lot of reason not to. Because if he does, then if he revokes his orders for a bill that doesn't codify his orders into law, then he's just given his base something and taken it away, which is worse than giving it to them in the first place. But I do think, by the way, at least some Republicans, I don't know how much they believe themselves, but Jason Chaffetz says it's at least theoretically possible to do some really good legislating on immigration. He points to a bill he had on family visas that got 389 votes or something like that in the House. So Republican House members talk like they believe that there's a lot of good bills they can pass that would not, do the path to citizenship stuff, but would make some significant reforms and give them something positive to talk about with Hispanic voters. Whether that'll happen, I don't know. And this might poison the well. Part of me, in my crazier, tinfoil hat moments, part of me wonders if Republicans wouldn't like to have an excuse not to pass an immigration bill. If Obama poisons the well with executive orders, are they really going to? Are they going to be brokenhearted that they didn't get a chance to tackle immigration heading into 2016? I don't know.
Right.
But what you've got the White House comms director Jennifer Palmieri on the record to the New York Times saying, "Our bottom line is we think people want results. They want things to improve. They want you to take action." And this is the key line for me: they're more focused on outcomes than process. Process is a really big deal in the American Constitution. So
right, yeah.
If you got a White House that is thinking in those terms, it makes it difficult to cut any deals with Congress.
Yeah, I mean, politically, I think that you're absolutely right that one of the optimal outcomes, I think, for Republicans is Obama just politically, not on policy, because obviously they would hate this policy, but Obama passes his executive or issues his executive order. They craft an immigration bill that they know will be unacceptable to the White House, send it to him, have him veto it, and then get a year and a half or whatever to hammer him on the issue of amnesty, and then hammer the Democratic candidate in 2016 on the exact same thing, and make he or she take a stance on Obama's executive orders that obviously they would hope would be incredibly unpopular.
You're actually going farther than I would. I don't think they'll do any bills of any significance. I think they'll say it poisoned the well, because if they do any bills of any significance, if you let's say they expand visas for workers, now you're alienating the. I don't know how easy it is for Laura Ingraham and Jeff Sessions and people who listen to them to get on board with that, because that's still flooding the labor market in a way that they find unacceptable. Right. You know what I mean? So I think they would probably just say, he poisoned the well. We've got 6 months until the Ames straw poll. There's no time for big legislating right now. Right.
That's a possibility. I mean, what I would, and this is just my cynicism talking here, what I would like to see is Republicans just not on policy. This is just because I believe that the gridlock is here to stay, and they're not going to solve anything in the Obama era. But what would be interesting is for Republicans to go into a flurry of legislating, both forcing Democratic filibusters on almost everything, and when they are able to build a filibuster-proof coalition, get Obama to veto everything, and then start claiming that Democrats are the source of the problem in Washington, which is exactly what Democrats have been saying about Republicans for the last 4 years.
Yeah, I think they really want to do that, and at the same time, but they don't exist in a vacuum. So at the same time, Obama is going to run the exact same "we can't wait" executive action messaging that he took up in 2011. So
yeah, that in that scenario, Republicans lose on policy, but they might sacrifice policy for the sake of greater politics and optics and all of that.
Yeah, and it sort of plays into. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying I think it's actually probably a good idea, but it doesn't actually affect Obama's math very much, unless he really starts taking a beating in the press. Because all that does, it doesn't actually force him to change the Congress won't act, so I will. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because he just defines congressional action as action in a way that he wants.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the chances of him taking a beating in the press are low, but maybe possible. Who knows?
We actually saw coming out, I think it was Ron Fournier and Chuck Todd both said that Obama's executive orders, if he stuck by them after that election, would be a real stiff arm to the American people. So it's possible there's a little bit that there is a little bit of an appetite for that kind of thing. And he's a lame duck, so it's not as if you got to start worrying. You're really worried about protecting your sources because they're all going out the door anyway. So maybe people who might not otherwise. I'm not talking about Fournier and Todd now, but maybe there's a little more appetite for burnishing your bipartisan credentials.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I wanted to move on now to President Obama's upcoming Attorney General nomination, and we're not sure when that will officially go before Congress. But Loretta Lynch is the person who is going to go up there, and I would say kind of surprisingly, or maybe encouragingly, in the wake of President Obama, saying that Loretta Lynch is going to be his nominee, we haven't really seen conservatives go on the offense. And I'm wondering kind of why you might think that is. Is her record just not enough right now at this moment, or are they actually, trying to appear like they're going to be very open to whoever it is that President Obama wants in the role of Eric Holder, who became one of the most despised cabinet members on the part of conservatives?
Well, we saw Ted Cruz and Mike Lee issue a statement saying that calling on Lynch to say what she thinks about the executive amnesty. And it doesn't take a lot of prognosticating to think that she will not denounce the executive amnesty, or will, if she does talk about it, will say she supports it. Most likely she won't say anything. And then Lee and Cruz will say, well, then we can't put somebody else in. We can't vote to install somebody who disrespects the rule of law, just like Eric Holder. That's one way for that to turn out. But they're not going to make it a litmus test. And this isn't speaking specifically about this, but there's no value added for a senator to tell the White House that his vote is ungettable before the confirmation hearing, because there's no reason for them to cooperate with you when you ask questions, and you look doctrinaire and unreasonable in the press. You've got to at least appear willing to accept new information in order to be a player. And so this sets up just going to the confirmation hearings, which a lot of conservatives wanted to have emphasized that should not take place in the lame duck session in order to make sure that it could happen next year when they have the Senate majority. Now, there's some pressure on Harry Reid to push through a bunch of confirmations. It's not just Loretta Lynch. There are hundreds of political appointments waiting to happen, both executive and judicial. And there's some division in the White House and Senate Democrats about how to handle that, because Reid doesn't want to poison the well any more than he already has. In theory, he could pull the trigger on the nuclear option and ram this thing through really quickly, this Loretta Lynch confirmation. Right. But the way it's supposed to go is you're supposed to have a committee hearing and then a vote, and that takes a little while. But that's complicated by this CR debate, where they don't have much time. They've basically been planning on getting out of town December 11 or 12, right after the government funding runs out and they pass a new CR. So that doesn't leave a lot of time, especially if they have any regard at all for Maryland or Louisiana, which Reid made clear today that he cares a little bit at least, or not today, but this week, that he cares about her a little bit at least because he gave her a vote on Keystone. But, her election is December 6th. Are you going to put her on the record supporting or voting against, either supporting Loretta Lynch or voting to deny cloture with Republicans? That's just, and if you're not willing to do that, then you've got to be debating and negotiating a government funding measure and doing a committee hearing on Lynch in a 5-day window between December 6th and December 11th. So
Right.
it's tough. But one conservative I talked to said that his guess was that Reid has sounded out Republicans and gotten the sense that that they will have the votes later. And that makes sense from the stuff the conversations that I've had with different sort of more establishment Republicans, or at least their staff, where the feeling seems to be that the consensus that I've heard from that wing of the party is we're not going to stop the first black woman nominee to be AG over Eric Holder's sins. So if
Right.
Eric Holder gives Obama the legal analysis he needs to do this, and Loretta Lynch says, it's not my bag, I didn't do that, unless there's something else in her record as a U.S. attorney, unless there are other big reasons to hit her, that she has baggage that we don't know about yet, I tend to think that it's not that difficult to get the votes you need.
Yeah. I wonder, what the optimal sequence of actions is. If they pass, I assume if they pass an executive order, or not pass, if Obama issues an executive order on immigration, that Loretta Lynch then, in her committee hearings, has to take a stand on something that is in text, is written down. So I would assume, right, that her confirmation has to go before the executive order would happen. But
Yeah, but
a lot of this is conflicting, because like you said, the executive order might go into effect next week, which would clearly be before Lynch's confirmation hearings.
Well, then here's how. Let's just pretend we're Loretta Lynch and her comms team for a second. Obama issues an executive order. That doesn't mean he's going to give you the legal analysis, the Office of Legal Counsel memo explaining why it's legal, and
Right.
and courtesy copy Loretta Lynch just so she can be up to speed. So now you're Lynch,
Right.
you say, look, I've got a tough job as a U.S. attorney, and I'm working on all this other stuff, and Justice Robert Jackson in Youngstown Steele case in 1952 said there's a 3-part test for what executive orders are constitutional and not, and so you got to follow that test. And I haven't, obviously they haven't released their internal deliberations on this, so I just can't speak to that. Next question.
Right. That's still, it seems like you can, if you put the executive order to paper, let's say a conservative, let's say Ted Cruz, says, if she's not a hard no on this, because it's obvious to me, Ted Cruz, and I, graduated from Harvard Law, I don't need to see the OLC justifications to know that this is illegal, and that, because of that, I need a definite yes from her, because we have the text of what he's doing right here. She should be able to analyze it that way. So it seems like it might transfer, and Ted Cruz might be a no on Loretta Lynch no matter what, but it might transfer the burden from a I don't know to a definite no on the executive order, right?
It would absolutely transfer the burden if there were more Ted Cruzes, but
right, yeah, exactly. It's the moderate, quote unquote moderate. It's the less Ted Cruz-y wing of the Republican Party that would be the ones susceptible to that.
Nobody has said this for sure, but I don't think that the Republicans who want to prove they can govern are going to kick off their new Congress by denying cloture on the first on the Attorney General nominee, because you would have to deny cloture, because then once you get past cloture, Dems have 46 votes, and the vice president, they only need 4 Republicans to cast a ballot on their behalf. Yeah. So it's not hard to count to 4 in that scenario. You can imagine all the usual suspects, Mark Kirk and Murkowski and Collins. I mean, I'm speaking speculatively, but it's not hard to imagine four Republicans in that conference backing it. So
yeah, enough Republicans that say, we defer a huge amount of authority to the president on these nominees, so we're going to say, yes, despite our reservations.
Yeah, and
you can easily get for it.
And that, I think that conversation, people are talking through scenarios at a staff level. From what I've heard, different senators are talking about what they're willing to do. And that's an issue. Some senators just really believe you have to defer a lot. And other senators don't think this policy is that big a deal, or think that they'll end up losing on the fight anyway, so why pick it?
Yeah. Okay, I think that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks a lot for joining me today, Joel, and talking through what we have to look forward to in the next weeks and months.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure, and I'll see everyone next time on Blogging Heads.
Bye.